Hey everybody, good morning. Welcome back. How are y'all doing? This is Chapman, Wednesday, April the 8th, 10 a.m. Group. Welcome back everybody. I know there's a few minutes until 10 a.m., so just as usual, getting things started a little early to give people a little margin to arrive. But good morning to everybody. Hope you're all doing really good, staying healthy and safe. And we're just going to go ahead and finish up our notes on epistemology today. If we have the chance, we'll start to talk about the next topic in the lecture series, which is the idea of time and the metaphysics of time. So we've got an important couple of meetings coming, finishing one subject, moving on to the next. But we got a few more minutes until 10, so I'm just going to be patient and wait until we get to the 10 a.m. mark. But for those arriving early, welcome, and hope you guys are having a good relaxing Wednesday morning. A lot of rain yesterday here where I live anyway, in Long Beach, so it was a good day, I guess, for the quarantine. Nothing to do, even if you could have left the house. So kind of relaxing sometimes when you get that pitter-patter rain, quiet day in. I know a lot of you guys are watching from all over the place. Many people have returned back to their family homes, and we got a lot of international students and people from all around the country. So whatever time zone you're in, whether this is the morning, afternoon, or evening, welcome back. And we're all in this together as we go through the last few weeks of our semester. But we still got a solid amount of work to do, so, the show goes on. But not to rush, I'm just hanging in there for a few more minutes. Right up till the last minute. Let's see how the numbers are when we reach 10. Important lectures, especially the transition to metaphysics of time. The ideas of Albert Einstein are sometimes, a little complex and definitely high-level theoretical stuff in science. So that's something I definitely believe you would need a little help for, and that's why I'm here to provide the help. So when we get to it, that's another very interesting topic too. All right, just another minute or so, and then we're ready to go. Good morning and welcome back, everybody. I wonder how many of you guys have classes in the earlier part of today, and then they just, what's the transition like for this? I can only say from the professor's perspective, but I mean, I teach a 9 to 9:50 a.m. class, and so, we wrap up right at 9:50, and then I just have like a couple seconds to gather myself, quickly turn the camera back on, and I'm, going live stream about 5 minutes before class time for you guys. I guess it's probably the same thing. You guys have classes, one live stream ends, going from Zoom, YouTube, whatever, to another professor. Well, we're all tech savvy in this current generation, and I think that we're probably well suited to deal with this. So that's good. And yeah, we're now at 10 a.m. pretty much. So welcome everybody. Good morning to you guys. Hopefully you're doing very well, and I'm here to help you through another lecture on the epistemology subject. We're about done with that. We just have to wrap up the work of Descartes, and then we'll see how much time that takes. Time permitting, we'll start discussing the next subject, which is the theory of time and Einstein. So feel free to chime in, say hello. I'd love to see which usernames are in the building and give me a sense of who I'm lecturing for. Other than that, quick note to remember, I've said a few times, most of you guys have already requested for your grade and comments on the midterms. Hey, Jordan, Kaylee, everybody. But if you haven't yet, definitely feel free. The midterms have been graded, and so I'm just going by email inquiry to reply and give people their grade back with comments and the scanned images of the written comments. So if you want that and you haven't yet asked, definitely feel free. Hey, Nellie, Lily, Olivia, Paula, Lane, awesome, good group. Glad to see you guys. And yeah, as always, as I've mentioned before, feel free to reach out to me by email. If there's ever a person who wants to have a little more of a video chat, I'm happy to set that up by appointment with anybody if you want. So any way I can be helpful, I'd love to be. Hey, Sophia, Bridger, Emily, everyone else. Great. So okay, let's say what we're doing. We're going to finish with the writings and ideas of this person and this philosopher, Rene Descartes. Okay, Descartes, living from 1596 to 1650, and his book of 1641 is what we're focused on, which is called The Meditations. And there's 6 chapters to the book. Hey, Annie and Misty. There's 6 chapters to the book, and they're just numbered meditations 1 through 6. So it's meditation 1, meditation 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The first 2 chapters are the assigned material for this lecture, and that's meditation 1 and 2. Okay, so we were going over this on the Monday meeting, and I think we just ran out of time to finish it. So I would love to ask, does anybody know or could quickly just say, what part of the material did we leave off with? We're talking about the method of doubt. So, I mean, let me know when you've heard how this is familiar. We say the Meditations book is written to try and discover what is certain. He thought that we needed to have a firm foundation placed underneath scientific knowledge, and that's why he said, let's find out what is totally certain. That will be our foundation. Good. Okay, Brian, you say dreams. So I'm building up to that, and we'll get right to that part of the notes. So he said, let's find what is certain. We need to do that if we're going to place a solid foundation and base underneath scientific knowledge. Okay, well, let's use the method of doubt, he said, in order to determine what is certain. The method of doubt says that one should assume to be false anything that can possibly be doubted. So if there's even one small possible chance that something could be false, let us assume that it is, and continue on in this same method until we discover something that cannot be doubted. And okay, good, Brian. So it seems that the point we left off with was what happens next. He says, one source of beliefs is a main source of beliefs, and that's all beliefs that come from sense perception. Beliefs that you have formed based on what you see, taste, touch, hear, and smell. Like if you're believing right now that you're looking at a screen watching your professor's lecture, then that's a belief that you have because of what you can see and hear right now. And it's not just limited to that example. I mean, just look around you. If you believe that you're in your room or if you're in your apartment or house, the reason you believe that is because if you look around and observe your surroundings, that's what I guess you're seeing or perceiving by other means. So perception we rely on. But he says it's not absolutely certain. They're subject to doubt, these perceptions. Now, how could they be doubted? And you got it right, Brian, because we could be dreaming. So all beliefs that are based on sense perception can be doubted due to the possibility that what you're experiencing is not real, but just a dream, okay? So if you have a dream, right, and you think that you're doing something in the dream, you're not really doing that. You're actually just in bed. So if this experience you're having now of listening to this lecture is itself a dream, then the perception that you have corresponding to it is not accurate. So since we cannot reliably or with total certainty distinguish dreams from being awake, all the beliefs of sense perception could be doubted, and therefore we can assume that they're false, at least methodologically, as we investigate and search for certainty. Now, this can be seen as somewhat of a little formal argument. I want to just kind of put the argument clearly on the board so that you understand how he's drawing this conclusion. So the argument could be put forward like this. 2 premises. First one says, to know anything from sense data, from sense perception, I must know that I'm not dreaming. Okay, first premise. To know anything from sense perception, I must know that I am not dreaming. The second premise says, but there is no way to know that I'm not dreaming. So, therefore, conclusion below, therefore, I don't know anything from sense perception. Okay, so this is a skeptical argument that is using the method of doubt to reach the conclusion that you don't know anything from the five senses. Because if you did know anything from the five senses, you'd have to be able to rule out that this is just happening inside a dream state. But since there's no totally certain way to distinguish between being awake and dreaming, that means that you cannot take away complete certainty that any of the five senses are reporting on the correct reality, and therefore you don't know anything from the five senses, at least insofar as we take this method of doubt seriously and apply it to the possibility of false perception coming from a dream or some other type of illusion, whether it's a computer simulation or brain in a vat scenario with a mad scientist feeding your brain electrochemical stimulation to give you the perceptions that you have. Whether it's any of those possible skeptical scenarios, we can't say that they're definitively, conclusively ruled out, and therefore perception could be false. Now, like what he says about that, he says, suppose then that I am dreaming, and that these particulars, that my eyes are open, that I'm moving my head, stretching out my hands, are not true. Perhaps indeed I do not even have such hands or such a body at all. So with that, we've eliminated all the beliefs from sense perception, and so we're still on a search for that certainty, and we haven't found it yet. It's not to be found in the whole realm of what you can see, taste, touch, hear, and smell, because those are things that could also be made in dreams, and therefore we can't say they're correct. Well, what's more certain maybe than sense perception? Okay, now here's a second possibility that Descartes suggests next. Even though he suggests it, you're going to find out that he withdraws the suggestion. But here's the next option. Maybe not sense perception is totally certain, but could it be that things that we think are true in mathematics, geometry, logic, trigonometry, could those things be absolutely certain and not subject to doubt? You might think so, because remember in an earlier lesson we discussed the difference between contingent and necessary truths. Necessary truths are things like 2 + 2 is 4, or the triangle has 3 sides, because it seems that those are statements that have no possibility of being false. And you might argue that that is even more certain than sense perception, because, for example, even if you're dreaming, you still would argue that 3 + 2 equals what? 5. It doesn't matter if you're awake or asleep, because the mathematical statement doesn't require for there to be any physical objects in space or time, just for the conceptual understanding of the sum to be derived. So you could argue perhaps, if you follow what I'm saying, that not sense perception, but mathematical truths, like 2 + 2 is 4, like there are 4 sides on a square, maybe those are things that cannot be doubted, because in a dream state and in a waking state, those facts hold good. 4 sides are on a square, both in a dream and in reality. So maybe this is something that escapes from the method of doubt and remains totally certain. You understand? So maybe it's not the sense perceptions, but this like purely formal science of math and logic and those kind of topics. Okay, well, look, Descartes raises this as a possibility, that this could be perhaps more certain than sense perception. But once he says it, he just as quickly snatches it away from us and says, not so fast. Actually, there are reasons to even doubt that stuff. Okay, so here's the first thing he says about how you could possibly doubt math and logic and geometry. He says, well, so Descartes, of course, he believes in God, just like any pretty much writer living in the early modern period, since it was a vastly orthodox time period in Europe and the West. So he would believe in God, and he says this to his readers, all of which would agree. He says, look, we know God exists, and God is believed to be omnipotent, meaning he's all-powerful, and he can do anything he wants just through his will. So when you're adding up 2 and 2 and you get 4, or when you're looking at a triangle and you're saying it's got to have 3 sides, maybe if God wanted to do it with his awesome, unlimited, infinite, majestic power, he could perhaps manipulate your beliefs about those things so that they seem to you to be so obviously correct that no way could you doubt them. But in reality, they're not true. Maybe God has set you up to fail when you add numbers or when you think about very basic propositions in the formal sciences of math, geometry, trigonometry, and so on. You understand? So he says, look, maybe that stuff can't be doubted. But wait, never mind, because God is all-powerful. And if God wanted to do it, he could warp and distort and throw off your beliefs even about those subjects. Now, he says that God could do that. But having thought about it for a moment, he again sort of changes his mind. So Descartes has this kind of mode of writing where it's a little dialectical, meaning that he'll suggest something, and then sometimes he'll speak in another voice and be like, but no, that can't be true. And sometimes he'll even debate with himself. He'll play devil's advocate against his own positions. So he'll state some claim, and then he'll be like, but if you think about it, maybe that's not really true. So here's how this kind of point-counterpoint dialogue that is going on happens here. He says, the method of doubt is on, we're using it, we're going to try and find what's certain, so assume things are false if they can be doubted. Sense perception, that could be doubted, so that's not the thing that we say is certain. Maybe it's math and all those things that is more certain than sense perception. But never mind, because God could warp your beliefs about that because he's got all power. But then he says, God could do it because his power is unlimited. But you know what? The thing is, God, although he could do that, he would not do that. And what is it about God that you think he's referring to, such that although God could cause your mathematical beliefs to be wrong, he just would not want to do that. He would not choose to do it, although he has the power to do it if he really wanted to. Why do you think he's claiming that God, although he could, wouldn't mess up your beliefs about math and all that? Why not? Why wouldn't he do it? Maybe, according to certain ideas of God. What could be the reason? Because God has no evil, right? Because God is considered, the term would be omnibenevolent, as we've talked about previously. So God is omnibenevolent, perfectly good, all good, not just somewhat good, but infinitely good to the maximum possible extent. So you would argue perhaps that if a being is perfectly good, then he wouldn't want to create, creatures in his own image, children of God, right? Just so that he could set them up to get everything completely wrong. So he says that would be deceptive of God. If he caused your mathematical beliefs to be false, then God would be the source of error, and he'd be basically tricking you about the things that seem the most clear and evident, and that would not be good. That would be, to the contrary, mean. That would be manipulative. That would be deceptive, but God's not like that. He's too good to do that. So he says those things. He says math could be wrong because God could throw it off, but never mind, he wouldn't do that because he's too good. Nonetheless, Descartes suggests this idea. Although God would not do that due to his omnibenevolence, it is possible that there could be some other being that is not God and therefore not perfect, but is above us in terms of power and control. So maybe he says there could be something like an evil demon that has the ability to completely control your consciousness and the things that you think are true. And it is this evil demon that is causing your mathematical beliefs, though evidently true, to turn out to be false. Okay? So understand what he says there. He says, a being that is above you could cause your mathematical beliefs to appear true, but nonetheless not actually be true. His first suggestion is maybe God could do that. And though he says God could do it, he reconsiders and says he wouldn't do it, though, because he's too good. But if there were an evil demon, something that is subordinate to God but above you and me, maybe that being could be the one that is causing this deception. And therefore, the possibility does remain that math and logic is incorrect. And why? Because it could be an evil demon that's manipulating you there. Not God, but maybe an evil demon. Now, you hear the words evil demon, and you, the student, may be thinking, well, that is definitely weird, and that's far out. I mean, what are we saying here? But keep in mind, right, when he wrote this, if he was writing this idea in like today, he would probably rely on more science fictional scenarios, like could there be a mad scientist that's got your brain in a jar and is like feeding it electrochemical stimulation so that it thinks 2 + 2 is 4 and it's just not actually true. In this case, this is a more modern way of looking at it. It would be the mad scientist or whoever, or the programmer of the computer simulation that you're in. That would be the surrogate for the so-called evil demon. Now he's writing in 1641, so they don't have these science fictional concepts of a brain being kept in a jar or a mad scientist programming computers. But what he did have was access to theological concepts of beings like demons and angels and God. And so he says that maybe there could be some being of whatever kind, he calls it an evil demon, that has total control over the things you believe and perceive. And in that case, it could appear true that whatever, 2 + 3 is 5, but it's not actually. Okay, so that's the second little element of his discussion. He starts by saying sense perception could all come from a dream, and that's why I'm saying it might be fake. Next, is math certain? Seems like it. Seems like it doesn't even depend on sense perception, so it could be more certain. But the problem is there could be a deceiver. He suggests maybe God, but never mind, God's too good for that. But an evil demon, something like that, could be the one. So maybe we can't even place trust in math, logic, geometry. So I'll read you now how he put these words. He said, so a reasonable conclusion might be that physics, astronomy, medicine, and all other disciplines which depend on the study of objects are doubtful. But arithmetic, geometry, and subjects like this, which deal only with the simplest and most general things, regardless of whether they really exist, contain something certain and indubitable. Because whether I am awake or asleep, 2 + 3 added together are 5, and a square has no more than 4 sides. It would seem impossible that these transparent truths have any suspicion of being false. And then he goes into the suggestion that maybe God could be the one causing error about that. He says, but yet firmly rooted in my mind is the long-standing belief that there is an omnipotent God who made me the kind of creature that I am. How do I know that he has not brought it about that there is no earth, sky, extension, shape, size, place, while at the same time ensuring all these things appear to me to exist just as they do now? Moreover, since I sometimes consider that others go astray in cases where they think they have the most perfect knowledge, may I not similarly go wrong every time I add 2 and 3 or count the sides of a square, or in some even simpler matter, if that is imaginable? Okay, and then he says this, but perhaps God would not have wished me to be deceived in this way, since he is said to be supremely good. Okay, skipping a little bit. I will suppose, therefore, that not God, who is supremely good and the source of all truth, but rather some malicious demon of the utmost power and cunning, has employed all his energy in order to deceive me. I shall think that the sky, air, earth, color, shape, sound, and all external things are merely the delusions of dreams, which he has created to ensnare my judgment. I shall consider myself as not having hands or eyes or flesh or blood or senses, but as falsely believing that I have all those things. I shall stubbornly and firmly persist in this meditation, and even if it is not in my power to know any truth, I shall at least do what is in my power, that is resolutely guard against assenting to any falsehood, so that the deceiver, however powerful and cunning he may be, will be unable to impose on me in the slightest degree. So this is pretty much where the first meditation, the first chapter, closes. And so it's kind of almost like a little cliffhanger. You know, you're wondering at the end of meditation 1, is there anything then that we can hold on to and say is certain? Or is everything completely subject to doubt? Because right now it looks like we've ruled out all the things that we form beliefs on from the 5 senses. And now we're also eliminating all the stuff that we know about math and geometry and logic and trigonometry and all those kind of topics. So is there anything left? Is there anything that the method of doubt will not? Meditation then, he goes on to the second chapter. And in the second meditation is where he starts to slowly but surely build back up from pretty much ground zero now, our conception of knowledge and everyday common sense. But he starts now from basically scratch, having eliminated all the sense perception beliefs and the beliefs from math. So second meditation opens up, and as he begins it, he kind of describes to the reader, man, yesterday's meditation really kind of shook me a little bit, because now I'm kind of worried that there's nothing that will be certain. And that's what he says. He says here on page 354 at the beginning of the second meditation, so serious are the doubts into which I have been thrown as a result of yesterday's meditation, that I can neither put them out of my mind nor see any way of resolving them. It feels as if I have fallen unexpectedly into a deep whirlpool, which tumbles me around so that I can neither stand on the bottom nor swim up to the top. Nonetheless, I will make an effort and once more attempt the same path which I started on yesterday. Anything which admits of the slightest doubt, I will set aside, just as if I had found it to be completely false, and I will proceed in this way until I recognize something certain, or if nothing else, until I at least recognize for certain that there is no certainty. Now, having doubted all the beliefs from the five senses and even math stuff, next thing Descartes is going to tell us is that actually, wait, there is something. There is this one unique belief or idea that cannot be doubted, that is indisputably true. There's one and only one thing he says that you cannot doubt. And I wonder what you think he's going to put on the table here. It has to do also with like a famous phrase of Descartes that some even non-philosophers have come across. But, you know, regardless of my little hints here, what do you think? What is it? What could be the one thing that cannot be doubted at all? No way to doubt this. What do you think it could be? Any guess? Let's see if you have a guess, and then I'll see what you work with what you got. Something that can't be doubted. It's not the five senses stuff. It's not math. It's something else. What is it? What is the thing that you cannot have any doubt about? Apart from, you know, I mean, obviously it's not going to be those things mentioned just now. So what could it be? You say, William, the existence of thoughts. Whose thoughts? Whose thoughts? Good, Jessica. So you're saying that you exist. These are both kind of connected, what William and Jessica have each said. They're of a piece. So let me just put it bluntly to you. Can you doubt that you exist? You. Can you doubt your own existence? Is that possible? Yes or no? Good, Caesar. You think, therefore you are. We're getting to the correct result here. There's one thing and only one thing that cannot be doubted. It's that you exist. How is it that you cannot doubt your own existence? Well, just try. Try right now. Start going into the thought process. Do I exist? Maybe I don't. Well, if you're thinking that thought at all, even if you're entertaining these doubts in your mind, a thing that's having doubts is something that exists. So look, even if the whole world and everything you're experiencing is a big dream, still, you're the one experiencing the dream. So the dreamer must exist, even if the things that are being dreamed are just illusions. Does that make sense? So one thing can't be doubted. And now we can say clearly what it is, that you exist. And why is that something that cannot be doubted? Because you're thinking. So that is the reason for Descartes' famous phrase that I see you put there, Caesar, I think, therefore I am. So that is now something that cannot be doubted. That is something that has survived the method of doubt and not been eliminated. So one thing remains certain. Despite the method of doubt. That I exist. This cannot be doubted. That you exist cannot be doubted because you are thinking. This cannot be doubted because I am thinking. And so this is the reason for the famous quotable quote of Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Since you're thinking, you can therefore conclude that you exist. The very fact that you're thinking at all, whether you're dreaming, hallucinating, having some kind of simulation put on you, you're still a thinker, a thing that is capable of having thoughts, judgments, beliefs, and so on, ideas. So the existence of your consciousness proves that you exist. whether or not you have a physical body, whether or not the environment you think you are in is real, at a minimum, you're something that exists in some way or other, just on the basis that you're thinking at all. The original Latin that this is translated from is this phrase, cogito ergo sum. So in the original Latin that Descartes wrote this in, it would be phrased as such, cogito ergo sum. And that means, so cogito is the old Latin root for consciousness. That's where we get the word cognitive activity or cognition. So consciousness. Ergo stands for the word therefore, so it states a conclusion. So it's consciousness, therefore reality. Sum meaning reality or existence. So since I have consciousness and thought, therefore you could take it to the bank that you exist, that's certain. So here's something that the method of doubt actually couldn't touch. The knowledge that you have of your existence. And why is that something that is not doubtful? Because of the fact that you're thinking. Even trying to doubt your own existence is self-contradictory, because if you're saying something like, or thinking, I don't exist, that makes no sense, because the being who's making the statement or having the thought must exist in order to have the thought itself. So one thing can't be doubted, even if anything else or everything else can be, that you exist. Now, what is the nature of this I that is known to exist? I'm not talking about like the eyeball, like EYE, but I mean I in the sense of the self, the individual self that you are. What is the nature of the I that you know to exist? Do you know yourself to have a body? We're using the method of doubt, keep that in mind. So consistent with the method of doubt, you know you exist, but do you know yourself to have a physical body, yes or no? Question for you. Do you know yourself to have a body? No, because the body is something that is perceived by means of the five senses. It's what you're looking at, feeling, hearing, and so on. So it could be part of the dream. The body that you take yourself to have could just be part of the illusion that your consciousness is experiencing. So if you don't know that you have a physical body, then Descartes, when he says you know you exist, Bridger, no, you do not know that you have a body, because your body could be something that you're just dreaming of. And in reality, if you were ever able to wake up, you'd find that you're having no body at all, like you're just a soul or a ghost or something like that, like a spirit. So understand the answer is definitively no. With the method of doubt, the body, just as much as anything else that's perceived with your eyes or whatever, is something that you don't know to exist. No, it's okay. I just wanted to clarify that so we're all on the same page. Now, so what is it then that is known to exist, this I that you are? If not a body, then it's just known to be what, at least? At a minimum, you are a what thing? If not a physical thing. Kind of helping you with some hints along the way, but the self, the I that is known by you to exist with no possibility of doubt, it's not known 100% to be a physical body. It's just known to be a what, if not a body, the self that you are. Imagine you're dreaming and your body's not real. So you're only known to yourself as a thinking thing. That's correct. A thinking thing, a pure consciousness. We're not talking about a brain with mass. We're talking about a completely disembodied, immaterial thinking thing, like a spirit, like a soul, like a ghost. You know yourself to exist as a thinking thing at a minimum, because the body could be doubted, but the mind and the existence of the mind, that's undoubtful, that's indubitable because of the fact that you're using it. So let me put that up here. The I that is known to exist is at least a non-physical mind, not a body. So you know you exist, because just think right now for about anything. That thought process establishes the existence of a subject having the thought process. But what is the real nature of this self that you are having thoughts. It might not be, in case you were dreaming, the familiar physical specimen that you see when you look in the mirror. It may be that your actual appearance has nothing to do with that, or is completely immaterial and disembodied. So your thoughts can be verified to exist because you're having them, but the existence of your physical body is something that remains somewhat subject to doubts in case we were having dreams or whatever. Now, let me read a little bit, and you can see him put the point in his words. He says, here, I have just said that I have no senses and no body. In that case, am I not at least something? Am I not so bound up with the body and with senses that I cannot exist without them? But I have convinced myself that there is absolutely nothing in the world, no sky, earth, minds, or bodies. Does it not follow that I do not exist? No. If I convinced myself of anything, then I certainly did exist. But there is a deceiver of supreme power and cunning who is deliberately and constantly deceiving me. In that case, I too undoubtedly exist. If he is deceiving me, and let him deceive me as much as he can, he will never bring it about that I am nothing so long as I am thinking. So after considering everything very thoroughly, I must finally conclude that this proposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true whenever it is put forward by me or conceived in my mind. But I do not yet have a sufficient understanding of what this I is that now necessarily exists. What then did I formerly think I was? A man. But what is a man? Shall I say a rational animal? No, for then I should have to inquire what an animal is, what rationality is. Instead, I propose to concentrate on what came into my thoughts originally, and quite naturally, whenever I used to consider what I was. The first thought to come to mind was that I had a face, hands, arms, and the whole mechanical structure of limbs that can be seen in a corpse, which I call the body. But what I shall say now that I am, when I am supposing that there is some supremely powerful, and if it is permissible to say malicious deceiver, can I now assert that I possess even the most insignificant of all the attributes which I said belong to the nature of my body? I scrutinize them again, but nothing suggests itself. What about the attributes I assign to the soul? Nutrition or movement? This surely does not occur without a body. But for all that, I am a thing which is real and which truly exists. But what kind of thing? As I have just said, a thinking thing. So I am not that structure of limbs which is called the human body. I am not even some thin vapor which permeates the limbs. I depict, let this supposition stand. For all that, I am still something. And yet may it not perhaps be the case that these very things which I am supposing to be nothing, because they are unknown to me, are in reality identical with the I of which I am aware. So he says here that we know ourselves, or you know yourself, I should be precise. You know yourself to be a thinking thing, not necessarily an embodied being. So you're essentially a thinking thing, a mind, a consciousness that can doubt, affirm, or entertain ideas. Now, you might hear that, and a lot of people hear that, and they say, this is strange, because I would have thought that my everyday common sense knowledge of physical objects that I perceive, isn't that a lot more certain and secure than the esoteric knowledge that he suggests that we have of certainty, which is that you exist as this immaterial mind or consciousness? How could that be more certain than, like, you know, that there's a table here that I'm just touching with my hands? Isn't this stuff a little bit more certain, the physical five senses and the beliefs we get from it? Well, Descartes says no, and he says this: even the knowledge that you do have of physical objects that you perceive with your five senses, even that knowledge is more directly derived from your mind and your mental activity, not your five senses. So he wants to insist that even when it concerns perception by the five senses, the knowledge that we have of bodies and physical objects is more derived from the mental behavior and activity we have in our mind. So he gives an example to show this, that the knowledge of physical bodies is essentially based on mind rather than physical perception. It's an example which uses a case of a piece of wax. Okay, so here's the example, the wax example. So I'm going to draw here a piece of wax. I'm going to try to draw it. Let's imagine that it's like a three-dimensional cube shape. So there you go. Not perfect, but whatever. Decent, okay. So there's our cube of wax. I want you to imagine what you're looking on the board there is just a chunk of wax. Now, the wax has a range of qualities that can be perceived with the five senses. So let's talk about each of those different qualities. First of all, the way it smells. Let's say it's scented and it smells like flowers. So that's they say olfactory quality, the smell aspect. Smells like flowers. Okay, so the visual perception of it, sight. Let's say that it's blue in color, so it looks blue. Okay, he's talking about this piece of wax, and a lot of times in his day, wax was made of beeswax, and so it would actually have a slight flavor that would be retained of the honey. So if you took a small piece, tasted it, it would taste like honey. So that's they call gustatory quality of its sensation. Tastes like honey. The tactile quality, the sense perception of feeling or touch. Let's say that if you touched it, it's in a solid state and it's cold, so it's hard and cold to the touch. And then for the auditory quality, let's say that like if you strike it with your knuckle or something, because it's in this solid state, it makes a sound when it is struck, like a rapping sound like that. So makes a sound when struck, like a knocking sound. Okay, so the point of this little breakdown is that it's got a perceptual quality for each of the five senses, right? So smell, taste, touch, hearing, and sight. It looks a certain way, it sounds a certain way, it smells a certain way, tastes a certain way, and it feels to the touch a certain way. Now, okay, that's how the wax is at an initial time point. Let's call that time T1, T subscript 1. This is like a lowercase t with a 1 number subscript. Suppose that at a later time, the wax has changed. That says T2. In between the interval of T1 and T2, let's say this piece of wax was heated with a high flame. So here's the flame, heat given off by it. The wax was exposed to this flame, and now, because of that, at the subsequent time, it's no longer in that solid state, but it's just kind of a goopy, misshapen, molten puddle of wax. Now, because of the exposure to the heat, let's say that the wax has lost all of those qualities or that they've changed. So, because it's been burned up by fire and melted, it used to smell like flowers, but the exposure to this high flame has made it smell kind of more like a charred smell, like a charred piece of wax. In the second case, it used to be blue, but it's been burned with such heat that it's now changed its color to more like a brackish brown. Third case, it used to taste like honey, but having been heated so much, it's lost that taste, and now it's just a bitter sort of burnt flavor. It used to be cold and hard, but it's neither anymore. It's been warmed up and it's been liquefied, so it's not in a solid state and it's no longer cold. And when you used to make a sound on it when you struck it because it was solid, well, now it's into like a puddle, so it wouldn't make the same sound. It might make a splash sound, but it could also just be that the surface on which it is positioned would be the thing that made the sound. So it either makes no sound or not the same one. Okay, so notice this. The wax has changed, hasn't it, due to the exposure toward the heat. But does the wax still remain? Does the wax still exist? Yes. So this is like a little lesson on the difference between essential and non-essential attributes of something. Essential attributes of something are the qualities that it has to have in order to be what it is. Non-essential qualities or attributes are qualities that a thing may have, but it doesn't need them in order to exist. Okay, so for example, take the case of a square. Is having four sides an essential attribute of a square or not? That's an easy question, I think. So the question again is, take the idea of a square. Is having four sides necessary? Is that a required, mandatory feature of squares, or is it optional? Is it essential or not essential to have four sides? It is essential. Good, Caesar. You cannot have a square with any other number of sides besides four. So having four sides is not just a maybe or a possibility when it comes to squares. It's a logical certainty and a necessity. How about this? Is being the color red a necessary or essential attribute of a square? Is it essential to be a square that it be red? It is essential that it have four sides, but is being red part of what's necessary to be a square? No. Okay, good. So, a square could be red, but that's not required. It could be red, blue, or any other color in the rainbow. But having four sides is not optional. That's something that if it didn't have four sides, it wouldn't even count as a square. Now, going back to our example of wax, thinking of these two terms, essential and non-essential attributes. Here are the qualities that the wax had at the initial time point. These five. Were these five qualities essential to the wax, though? Is it essential to this piece of wax that it smells like flowers, that it looks blue, that it tastes like honey, and that it feels cold and hard, and so on? Are those necessary or essential features of this piece of wax? And I hope we can all understand clearly, no, they're not. They're not essential. Why not? Because those qualities can be eliminated or changed, and yet the object still exists. So what's really essential to the wax are the qualities of it that don't change across time 1 to time 2. The things about the wax that have stayed the same despite all of those surface changes that have occurred. So what are the essential attributes of the wax then? That's what we'll get into next. So he thinks there's really 3 essential attributes of this wax. And the wax then becomes just an example of any type of physical object. So what are essential attributes of physical objects like the wax? The non-essential attributes we've talked about. The color it had at a given point in time, the smell or taste that it had at a given point in time. But those are non-essential because they can be lost and the wax continues to exist. The essential attributes of the wax or of any other physical objects are these 3. The first is that the wax, even at time 2, is still something that is extended. Now, the word extended is kind of like a philosopher's term or a scientist's or physicist's term. It refers to a thing just having some occupying of space. So anything that is extended occupies some volume or region of space. Like this marker that's in my hand, it's extended. It takes up the space that the marker does, and it occludes other objects from occupying that same space. Like I'm an object that's extended too, and I'm sitting on a chair and nothing else can occupy the same space as me, since my physical extension consumes some range of space. If there was something that had no extension, then it would not be in space at all. It would be like a mathematical point having no dimensions, no height, breadth, length, width, or depth. So anything that occupies space in this universe is called something extended. And notice that at time 1, the wax occupied space. At time 2, it's still extended in space. It's just that it's kind of been shaped into a different contour or configuration. But it's not been eliminated from it occupying space. Even if we chopped it up into a bunch of little pieces and blew it up and scattered it around, it would still have extension. Now it's just scattered into different parts of space. Now the second essential attribute of physical objects is, as he says, flexible. That just means that it's capable of undergoing changes to its shape or contours, right? So at the beginning, it was molded into a cube. Now it's been melted down into a puddle. But I guess if you really wanted to, you could collect that wax, put it back into another mold, like a triangle pyramid shape, cool it, and then it would take on another shape. So it can be flexed into innumerably many different forms. And then the third quality is that it's something that remains changeable. That just means that it's something that's able to undergo change of attribute, like having used to be blue and now being brown, or having used to smell like flowers and now smelling like charred, you know, charcoal or whatever. So the deeper essential attributes of the wax are these. And what Descartes wants to mention is that those underlying essential features of the wax or any other physical object are not perceived by the five senses. They're known or understood merely through the mind and through intellectual contemplation, not the five senses. Because what the five senses provide you with is just a temporary snapshot of what perceptual qualities that a thing has at a given point in time. But that's not to see what is essential to it, because what is essential to it is what endures across all the changes over time. So let's go back to you. You take yourself to have a physical body, and I guess you do, even though at this point in the meditations, we're holding that off as something we can doubt. But let's imagine you have a physical body like the one that you think you have sitting right there. Has it always been the same? Well, no. If you go back 10 years, your body was much smaller, you looked much different, had much less mass, you had maybe a different haircut, maybe you had different teeth if you're a little kid that still didn't have all your adult teeth in yet. But notice that you still exist. So what was the physical description of you at that time is just a moment in time. But the object that you are, the body that you have, remains existing over time because it continues to exhibit these three essential qualities. But like your height or your weight or your hair color or, people lose limbs, all things can happen to your body, but if you continue to exist, these three deeper lying traits remain. So when you think about objects in space that you perceive with the five senses, Descartes is insisting that you have a deeper knowledge of their essence when you think about them through the mind. The mind can comprehend the survival of objects that endure across ever so many changes to their perceptual qualities. And then that means you're thinking of things in a deeper, more essential way when you don't think about them as they appear through your five senses, but when you think about them on an essential level through your mind. So when Descartes says what you know yourself to be most essentially is a mind, he's saying that the knowledge that you have of your own being is more directly connected to your thoughts and ideas than the physical body that you have. The physical body that you have can and does change, but what's durable and enduring in you is the consciousness that inhabits the body. As we're going to learn in a few weeks, he's what's called a dualist. He believes that you exist most essentially as a soul or spirit, as they call it in philosophy, a mind, but that you also inhabit a body. But the thing about the body is that it's not essential to the being that you are. So according to Descartes, that's why we have the idea of existing even if our body ceased to exist. And I'll just leave you with this, because I think it's kind of interesting. A student who starts learning Descartes, and I can relate to that because of course I did at some point, a natural response that some have is, isn't it a little bit, wild or out of bounds to think that I could exist with no body? Because he suggests with the method of doubt that the five senses perceive the body, but they could be dreaming. And sometimes a person can be resistant to that suggestion. Like, how could I ever exist with no body? That makes no sense. But I always find that to be an interesting response or reaction, because we all know that the vast majority of everyone, including most of you, believe in God, believe in the soul, and believe in the afterlife. But if you believe in the soul, that means that you already agree with the idea that you could exist at a future time when your body doesn't. As we know, the body doesn't live or survive forever, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. So if you really thought it was impossible to have consciousness and to exist in a disembodied state, then that means that you must also deny the theoretical possibility of the soul existing in the afterlife, because at that point, there won't be a body to provide as the basis or seat of the consciousness or the brain. So I think that most people would probably have to reconsider how far out they think Descartes is if they do take seriously the thesis of the afterlife and the existence of the soul, because it says much the same thing. Now, we will continue on our lecture series next time by starting the next topic. I kind of thought today would take most time going over Descartes, and it did. But we have 2 meetings next week that would have been devoted to an in-class movie. So since that movie's not going to be shown, I have plenty of time for us to catch up. So I'd just like you guys to read the work of Einstein for Friday, and that's when we'll start on this next back to your everyday lives. Have a great day, and I will see you back on Friday, okay? And don't forget, if you want to ask me about your midterm grade and see the comments, they're all graded up, so anyone can email me. Most of you have, but if you haven't, so if you want, I can give you your score. Just request it via email. Okay, guys, thanks again, and have a good one, and I will see you back in a couple days. All right, take care.